Hello, my name is Stephan-Raes. I'm a policy analyst at the Center for SMEs and Entrepreneurship Cities and Regions at the OECD, and have been working on OECD's SME strategy for the last year and a half. I will present to you something that's related to Agenda Point 5 for the Working Party on SMEs and Entrepreneurship on the 21st and 22nd of October, which relates to this OECD strategy on SMEs. I will present the paper with the code CFE SME 2020-17 Annex, which is the synthesis analysis on SMEs and productivity, innovation, and digitalization. During the working party itself, we will present the other document for this agenda point, which is a progress report on the SME strategy, as well as an outline for the consolidated report at the end of the first phase of the strategy. Let me now start sharing my screen to give you my presentation. 1 second. Here we go. Et voilà. So I'll present you, as I said, this synthesis analysis on SMEs and productivity, innovation, and digitalization. What I'll do in the presentation is hopefully to make it easier for you to read and understand the document and where it comes from. To that end, I'll start with a bit of the background on the strategy, which is something that we've done in previous working party meetings as well. I will then delineate the approach that we took to this synthesis analysis, which, as you understand, is quite a large endeavor focusing on both productivity, innovation, and digitalization. Next, I'll say a few things on the results, on the outcome, the preliminary conclusions that we draw from this analysis. And to conclude, I'll say a few words on what's next. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can reach me by email. My email address is on the last slide. Be more than happy to help you out in there. But let me start with the background. As you know, the OECD SME strategy was part of the program of work and budget 2019-20. As a first step, an incremental approach in the strategy. It's focused on 3 deliverables, or work streams, as we call them. One had to do with SME heterogeneity, the large differences among the SME population, and the need for policymakers to better understand these differences. The second deliverables is a stock take of existing SME policy frameworks and strategies, if you want to. So to see how countries have progressed in their SME policy framework at national level. And the third deliverable is the synthesis analysis. The synthesis analysis we do to assess and of course bring together what we know and do not know in analysis on SMEs and SME policy making. We basically try to test the ground if we have sufficient knowledge to then continue in the SME strategy to develop more concrete tools and guidance on how to best do policies for small businesses. We've undertaken such synthesis analysis with a view of identifying knowledge gaps. Where don't we know enough and where do we have a good base? Where there are inconsistencies in the outcome of analysis, but also in policy messages, and where there are even trade-offs in between these objectives of policies, for instance. We've made so far a number of synthesis reports. One on skills and SMEs. There was one on SMEs and the environment and climate issues, you may remember. We prepared one on internationalization and global value change. And we have, I believe for the last meeting, that we had also prepared an analysis on SMEs and the regulatory and institutional framework. For this working party meeting, we have prepared, as I said, a synthesis analysis on SMEs, productivity, innovation and digitalization. And you see the code here for your convenience. The idea is that when we have rounded up the different products for the first phase of the strategy, that we prepare a consolidated report, which marks the end of phase one. And during the working party meeting, we will present the outline and preliminary conclusions across all deliverables for this first phase. It remains quite complicated, the whole structure of the SME strategy, but I hope that with this slide you understand how this particular analysis on productivity, innovation, and digitalization fits in. What we did in our approach to this requires a couple of words because this is such a mer à boire, such a large subject that we needed to be really precise and clear in how to focus. Our perspective on the topic was to start looking first and foremost on the nexus of SMEs and productivity. SMEs are important for productivity through their own productivity growth, which of course translates in an impact on macro and aggregate level, but also through, let's say, business dynamics with new firms coming up, firms leaving, competition effects, through which SMEs and new firms have an impact on macro productivity growth. At the same time, of course, productivity growth is important for SMEs as well. Becoming more productive can mean saving costs. It means becoming more competitive. And since productivity and wages are related, also strengthening productivity growth can have an impact for inclusiveness and for wages among employees within smaller businesses. What we did, and that's the second bullet, we looked at innovation and digitalization as drivers for SME productivity growth. It's well documented, and I say a few words about it later, that firms that become more innovative, that make a good use of digital kind of technologies, have the potential to become more productive, and hence are as important for productivity. But that focus, of course, implies a number of choices. First, there are other drivers than innovation and digitalization for SME productivity growth. For instance, skills, both of employees and management, can have a significant impact on productivity. That was not the objective of the current analysis. As I said before, we did a separate analysis on SMEs and skills, which provided ammunition on this topic, which will also be part of the end report, as I said before, the consolidated report, but it will not be the main angle in the work that we've done today. Also, of course, innovation and digitalization, but let's take the example of innovation, has different kind of objectives for SMEs than simply raising their productivity. In a number of cases, innovation serves other kind of purposes, maybe environmental, let's say social innovation. These aspects of innovation, again, have not been the subjects of this analysis. So taking SMEs and productivity as the main nexus, and innovation and digitalization as the drivers, we formulated two main questions for this piece of work. One is, what are the knowledge gaps, inconsistencies, and trade-offs in understanding productivity growth from an SME perspective, with innovation and digitalization as its main drivers? And second, because we do this, of course, to make policies better, what do we know about the effectiveness and efficiency of policies that support that? These were the two main questions that we tried to answer in the paper. We did that in the following structure, which you see here. After an introductory chapter, chapter 2 provides a synthesis, a summary, if you want to, of OECD analysis and policy messages on both SMEs productivity, SMEs innovation, and SMEs and digitalization. You find in that chapter 3 boxes, which gave quite an extensive overview of the many publications that exist on these topics. I'll say a few words about that later on as well. Chapter 3 is about why is this important? And there we focus primarily on why are SMEs important for productivity growth, although we say a few words about the reverse angle as well, the importance of productivity for SMEs. Chapter 4 dives into what lies underneath. What do we know of the drivers of SMEs productivity growth, and what are the barriers, why they maybe struggle to become more productive? In there, we highlight, and that's the logic from the focus and the structure that we chose. In there, we of course discuss innovation and digitalization as drivers, but we also pay specific attention to the heterogeneity of what's taking place, because both on performance as well as in the kind of barriers and drivers that SMEs experience, there appears to be quite a large variation amongst firms. Chapter 5 is on policy, where we discuss a number of horizontal policy angles as well as more specific SME targeted kind of policies. And we also try to address the issue how in that large whole of relevant policies, you can remain coherent and consistent in the messages that OECD brings forward. And then finally, we have a conclusion, a chapter on the knowledge gaps, inconsistencies, and trade-offs that we found, summarized in the table, which is what we've done in earlier synthesis analysis too, to hopefully make it clear for you what the main findings of this report are. I will now continue with the different results from the study that we did. First one is let's say, an easy one. This is just to show you that there is a lot of work at OECD on SMEs and productivity, innovation, and digitalization. You see in this graph, which is based on hits in the OECD iLibrary, that the number of studies has been rising. There's a number of factors behind that. You see that digitalization studies are catching up. In fact, over 2020, now we have more studies on SMEs and digitalization than on the other two topics. But you all in all see that at the moment there is 800 different kind of hits that you find for each of these topics in 2019. If you look more closely what kind of studies they involve, you see on the one hand, of course, a number of studies very close to the heart of the working party of SMEs and entrepreneurship, which are dedicated and focused studies on SMEs. There's a large variety of them. The paper gives an overview there, including their policy implications. Next to that, OECD has, of course, a wide range of more generic, if I may use that word, or studies focused on different kind of topics, on skills, on digital, on regulation, which often have a SME angle to them or are relevant in different kind of ways for the SME topic, productivity, innovation, and digitalization that we discuss here. There's a large number of them there as well. And then third, and I mention them specifically because they are an important part, I think, of what OECD has been doing of relevance here. There is a good deal of empirical studies at firm level which try to understand differentials in productivity performance amongst firms, which lead to a number of conclusions on both digital innovation as well as productivity itself, which are relevant for this exercise. So this is just taking stock of what we found. And as I said before, the boxes in chapter 2 give you an overview of the different studies that I meant. I go to the second slide of results, which goes a bit deeper in what we found. What you see in the data, and the OECD is of course an important source of data on productivity as well as on innovation and digitalization, that on aggregate SMEs are less productive, less innovative, and have less whatever access and use of digital kind of technologies than larger firms. At the same time, what we found is that there is a large variation between SMEs. There's a number of SMEs which are extremely innovative, which are highly productive, and there's SMEs that play an important role in the development of digital technology. So averages, of course, hide a lot. And in understanding this intersection of SMEs, productivity, innovation, and digitalization, it is important to become more precise and to have better data at more granular level to both understand differences in performance as well as, of course, the factors that lie underneath there. What we find as well is that there is an important need to further clarify two different pillars, if you want to, aspects on how SMEs can be relevant for productivity growth. One angle is the intra-SME productivity growth. SMEs function as organizations and have the strategy, or less of a strategy, to grow and to become more productive. And of course, by becoming more productive, they have an impact of the wider national macro productivity growth. Next to that, there is lots of analysis within OECD, which looks more from the perspective of resource allocation among firms. The pattern of creative destruction, where new firms, SMEs, of course, can play a strong role, and how that dynamic whole contributes to larger productivity, because less productive firms disappear, there's shifts between sectors from less to more productive sectors, and in its totality, that process leads to higher level of macro productivity growth. That element is extremely important as well. And in the analysis that we did, we found it important that in OECD messaging, these two components both are looked at sufficiently. There is a need, of course, to look at how resource allocation can be improved in order to boost macro productivity growth. There's also reasons to look at SMEs themselves, the barriers and drivers that they face, and the ways that we can generate that further intra-SME productivity growth. That as a second result related to SME performance. I'll move to my third set of results, which is close to this, but not exactly the same. This relates not so much to lack of data, but how they are presented. You recall that there's a lot of work in OECD and elsewhere that looks at the contribution of SMEs or young firms, new firms, to employment growth. There seems to be less emphasis in OECD work in presenting and interpreting productivity data from a firm size perspective, whereas that can be very relevant. The slide, or the graph, I should say, that I show here is on European Union countries, and it shows a decomposition of labor productivity growth, where firm size structure is one of the variables. And what you see, for instance, is that the different parts of the graph show the distance in countries from the average European Union labor productivity. If you look at Germany, which is here, that the difference between German labor productivity and the EU average is completely explained by difference in firm size structure. That could be a way of showing how the distribution in firm sizes is important there. I'll give you another example from the UK, where quite a lot of work has been done on the intersection of SMEs and productivity, and where it was calculated that if all UK SMEs would be able to increase their productivity up to the level of German SMEs, that could generate an extra boost in GDP of 100 billion pounds UK. These are just calculations that show how important a strengthening of SME productivity can be, or how relevant looking at firm size variables can be to better understand differences in productivity performance across countries. I move to my next slide, which is on the drivers and barriers. Here, the conclusion is that drivers and barriers for SME productivity growth are very well documented with many factors. There's, of course, framework conditions playing a role there. There is innovation, skills, access to digital, as well as access to finance as examples, which are important and come back both in these generic OECD studies as well as in more specific SME-oriented ones. But at the same time, the conclusion is that OECD work could benefit from a further empirical foundation and connection to the existing literature on firm size and productivity, which is developing outside of the OECD. There is rich work taking place there, which relates these different drivers to firm size, which could be an important complement to the policy messages analysis that's doing within the organization. I move to my next slide, and I already said something about that before when I was talking about performance, that there is this large variety and differentiations amongst different groups of small businesses in how they perform, how they relate to the different drivers. You may recall that in the context of the SME strategy, we did some work on developing SME typologies, classification of different types of SMEs to better understand how they operate, what are the drivers of their performance, and ultimately, of course, what these differences mean for policy making. One conclusion that came out of that typology work, but is, I think, underlined here as well, is that SME productivity, innovation, and digitalization are important areas to further explore that possibility for developing SME typologies. There is such differentiation that it makes it relevant. There is also, more than in other areas, probably data that allow you to make these kind of distinctions. So this is certainly an area to look at in that further work stream. But at the same time, the relevance and the kind of typologies, the kind of classifications that seem relevant from, let's say, an innovation perspective or a digitalization perspective might be quite different. In the literature on innovation, there is more and more emphasis on the role of young, new firms, startups, and scale-ups in fostering innovation as well as productivity. And the kind of types that perhaps will be needed are related to identifying those innovators, if you want to be able to see what are the best kind of drivers and policy recipes to support them. For digitalization, that's partly different. Of course, you've got front runners in digitalization as well. You've got digital innovation, which is important. But the question around digitalization and differentiation of SMEs seems to be distinct. Because digitalization, as a trend, if I may say, as a trend that every SME is confronted with, more puts the finger on the question, how can we identify and articulate the different capacities of groups of SMEs to partake in that digital transition? To think that all SMEs have the same kind of needs and ambitions there, of course, would be silly. But the question in classification terms is, how can we better understand the different kind of needs and attributes of SMEs that help them to join in that digital transition? This is more a question and a differentiation classification question related to sustainability, where there's also this kind of inclusive perspective on bringing in the different types of SMEs, whereas perhaps the policy discourse and analytical discourse on innovation is more, okay, how can we boost the performance of firms that are in particular relevant for innovation at macro level. Let me move to my sixth result, and that's also the last one. And that has to do with policies. As I said before, the policy agenda for SME productivity, innovation, and digitalization is a very broad one. And as is argued often, and rightly so, needs a holistic kind of perspective where you combine different elements, excellent framework conditions, few barriers to entry and exit, well-functioning markets. But next to that, you need more targeted measures, ensuring access to capital and finance for SMEs. There's a skills agenda. There is also elements of that perhaps related to digitalization and innovation. So there is this need of a holistic approach. Now, that in itself, I think, is widely shared, but there is at the same time the question how across the board, through all these different OECD publications, there is clarity in what SME implications or recommendations are as a totality. Now, of course, the objectives and the perspectives of different OECD publications massively different there. The more generic publications look at a wide number of policy kind of challenges and are probably more inclined to focus on the framework related aspects or on level playing field related aspects and relating to firm size, whereas the more specific policy studies focus more on specific kind of elements that are relevant for SMEs. Now, if you look at it from a bit of a distance and you see that totality of publications, it remains important, of course, that there is some systematic kind of message that comes across. Not that every OECD publication needs to emphasize SMEs as much as others, that would be silly. But you need some kind of a systematic mainstreaming of SME policy considerations across the different kind of publications of OECD. That would very much help to make sure that the message that comes across in the different kind of parts of the organization is indeed coherent and consistent as well. I move to my last slide, which is what's next. We've now finalized this draft of the synthesis analysis on productivity, innovation, and digitalization and SMEs. We would be very grateful if you could send us your written comments before the 15th of November so that we can take them into account in the finalization of the paper. And as I believe I said before, what we'll do is this paper, this synthesis paper, will be part of the consolidated report on the first phase of the SME strategy. So we'll be also reflected in there during the working party on the 21st of October. We'll present an outline for that a consolidated paper. And you may have seen in the preparatory documents that we made for that we have already included the main conclusion of this synthesis paper as part of the larger whole. This is what we have in mind in moving forward to make sure that we round up this SME strategy's first phase in a productive way. That being said, I very much hope that this presentation has been useful to you in understanding the document, in how it's structured, what its messages are, and how it is positioned within the sometimes complex SME strategy whole. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to contact me. You find my email address here. I'd be delighted to answer further questions, and I look forward to seeing you all virtually, of course, during the meeting on the 21st. I wish you a very nice day, and I thank you for watching. Thank you. Bye.